Okay, well, I don't know why my intro just froze up like that, but it suddenly just stopped playing and I can't get it going again. All right, well, no matter. So, welcome back to another Classic Comics Trek Talk live stream. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the original Star Trek series episode, Patterns of Force. And Patterns of Force has a pretty simple hook to it. Yahtzees in space. I mean, who doesn't like that, right? It's an easy one to understand. All right, as always, I'll be reading from These Are the Voyages by Mark Cushman for behind the scenes information about the episode and the making of it. All right, let's just go ahead and dive in here. So we start off with the Enterprise on its way to a planet called Ekos because there's a Federation historian named John Gill who was put on this planet to study it, basically study the people in their development and all that. But they've had no word from Gill for several months, so Starfleet has sent the Enterprise to check on Gill and see what's going on. Now, as they approach Ekos, they detect a vessel of some kind approaching them. And it turns out that the vessel is actually some sort of missile with a nuclear warhead. Now, they managed to phaser it and destroy the missile, but they're somewhat perplexed by this because Echo shouldn't have that kind of technology. Now, this episode was written by John Meredith Lucas and directed by Vincent McAveety. Now, Uhura says that she's picking up a signal from Ekos. Let's see here. So they go ahead and, uh, but there's no response from Gil is the problem. And so Kirk decides, well, we're going to have to go down there and look for him. So he and Spock are going to beam down. So they have McCoy inject them with these microscopic transponders, or not microscopic, but very small transponders that'll help the Enterprise locate them if they get captured or anything like that. So they beam down to the planet. Now, you think they would beam down in some out of the way place, so where people aren't sure to see them, but they beam down just right in the middle of town. Now, shortly after they arrive, they see a guy being beaten by some men in uniforms, and the uniforms include a swastika. And of course, Kirk and Spock are somewhat perplexed by this because these men are dressed as Yahtzees. So they refer to the guy they're beating on as a Zeon pig. Now, in this star system, so there's two planets. There's Ekos, but then there's another planet named Zeon. And so apparently Zeons are from this other world and aren't native to Ekos. Now, after they drag that guy off, there's some sort of public broadcast system that Kirk and Spock see. And in it, they see information about how they're planning an invasion of Ekos and how the Zeons have, basically the Zeons are a threat and they need to be eradicated, etc., that sort of thing. They see this woman named Darius being given a medal. She's a sort of hero to the Yahtzees. And then the announcer concludes by giving a Yahtzee salute to their Fuhrer, who is John Gill. And of course, this is a big mess. And of course, we should have seen this coming because at the beginning of the episode, Kirk mentions how he admires Gill. Gill, I guess, was one of his teachers when he was at the academy or something like that. Gill is an historian. And, every episode we have where, Kirk at the beginning expresses admiration for some character, inevitably it goes badly. It turns out that the person's a lunatic or some sort of megalomaniac or something like that. So not really surprising. Now, shortly after seeing the broadcast, they're confronted by a Yahtzee. Now, Spock obviously doesn't look like a native, but they're able to overpower him. And it's interesting because instead of, say, a nerve pinch, Kirk just like whacks him on the shoulder. It's, Kirk literally just kind of gives him like kind of a bump on the shoulder and the guy just collapses. Nice if that could work in real life, I guess. Anyway, his uniform will fit Spock perfectly, as it turns out, perfectly fits him. So Spock puts on the uniform, and then Kirk is posing as his prisoner, I guess. Of course, they walk about 5 feet, and then they're stopped by a Yahtzee officer, of course, who wants to know what's going on. And then Spock nerve pinches him. So now they have another uniform, and this one will fit Kirk. So then they go to party headquarters. They're looking for Gil. They're trying to find out where Gil is so they can get some sort of explanation from him for what the heck is going on. But they're stopped by another Yahtzee officer who first tells Spock, you should see a doctor because, Vulcans, because they have green blood, they have this kind of yellowish, almost yellowish skin. But then he insists that Spock remove his helmet. Of course, they try to get out of it, but the guy refuses to be placated, and he demands that Spock take off his helmet, which, of course, he does, and reveals his ears. So obviously, they are not from around here. So they're taken prisoner, and then they are whipped. And then the officer questions them, wanting to know, of course, where they're from, what's their purpose, are they spies, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, they're not talking. Then this other guy shows up. His name is Enig, and they refer to him as the party chairman. So he's some sort of pretty high up authority figure. And the officer reveals they haven't been able to get anything out of these guys. Now, Enig questions them, but of course, they aren't really talking. So Enig suggests putting them in cells. Now, this is kind of puzzling to me. He says that let's put them in the cells and let them stew for a while. The officer is opposed to this because he says that the procedure with spies is to torture them and then execute them. But there's another guy, this other Zayon, who's in a cell. So I don't know. Maybe they figure he's not a spy, I guess, and that's why they're keeping him in a cell. Anyway, they throw Kirk and Spock into prison. And then the Zayon, his name is Isak, he wants, of course, to know who Kirk and Spock are. Now, and of course, they're obviously not telling him the truth about why they're really there. He just says that they're trying to find the Fuhrer. And they need to speak with him. Now, of course, the first step is to get out of the cell. And of course, the cell is locked. So what they hit on is the idea. So these transponders that they have that have been implanted into them, they have some sort of crystal in them. And so they decide to use these crystals as a lens to create a laser to cut the cell door open. Now, this is, I'm not sure how much scientific really basis this would have. But Kirk pulls a piece of metal off of a nearby cot, and then they use this jagged metal to cut their arms open to get the crystals from these transponders. They then place the crystals into the holes at the end of these pieces of metal Spock holds them up to a light, and that creates a freaking laser beam, which cuts the latch off of the door. That allows them to get out. They then lure a guard in, and Spock is able to subdue him. Now they decide they're going to have to try and, of course, they still need to find Gil. They're about to go, but then Isak says, "Take me with you." Now, part of the problem is because they have their communicators and phasers have been confiscated. Now they know that the phasers have been taken to a nearby lab for study. And Isak says, "I know where the labs are. So, if you want to find the labs, take me with you." And they're reluctantly forced to agree to that and take him with them. So he takes them. Kirk puts on a uniform and he takes them to the lab. However, as they're approaching, Kirk acts like Isak has pushed him. And then he causes a fight, and in the scuffle, they subdue and nerve pinch the guard and take him out. They bring him into the lab. Now they find their phasers, but the phasers have been dismantled. And so Spock suggests, we'll have to try and rebuild these things. Now, while they're working on that, a guard interrupts them. Isak manages to subdue the guard. I'd say a lot of people in this episode get bonked on the head. There's a lot of people getting bonked or judo chopped on the neck and knocked out, it seems. Now, Spock puts that uniform on, so now they're both back in disguise again, and then they walk out carrying Isak, pretending that he's injured or sick. Now, Isak takes them into the sewer lines, and from there, Isak leads them to a hideout where there's a bunch of people who work with there's a Yahtzee regime, so of course there's a resistance, and Isak's part of the resistance, and this is their hideout. So he takes them there. Now, then meet Abram, and Abram is a leader of this particular resistance cell. And then he informs Isak that I forget her name, but the woman that Isak loved. Hail, Gwagnar. Hey, thanks for stopping by, sir. Always good to see you. Anyway, the Yahtzees have killed her, so he's a bit torn up about that. So Kirk and Spock ask for a place where they can work undisturbed, so they work on reassembling the phaser. Now, or I'm sorry, not the phaser, the communicator. Communicator. So they rebuild one of the phasers. Now, while they're doing this, they're interrupted by more Yahtzees, including this blonde woman named Darius, who we already saw is was receiving a medal at the beginning of the episode. So she threatens to kill them. But then Abram, he says, he's the one in charge, and so he's responsible. So she says, okay, fine. So then she kills Abram and shoots him dead and says, that's how we deal with, that is how we deal with spies, that sort of thing. So then she's going to kill Kirk, but Kirk and Spock manage to overpower her and take her weapon. And then it turns out Abram's fine. He's not dead. In fact, he was never even shot. It turns out the whole thing was a ruse to test Kirk and Spock and determine their loyalty, if they can be trusted or if they really are Yahtzees or not. And so they've passed the test. So, and then we learn that Darius is actually part of the resistance as well. And then Kirk and Spock reveal to her the truth that their Fuhrer, John Gill, is actually an alien. Of course, she's shocked to learn this. And Kirk insists that, we have to speak to Gill. We have to see the Fuhrer. And she says that's impossible. For the last couple of years, he's largely lived in isolation, and he has a bunch of guards around him. It's impossible to get to him. But then she mentions that later this evening, there's going to be a broadcast. He's going to give a speech, and now it's anticipated that this is going to, during the speech, he's going to officially declare war on the Zeons, which will probably mean, I don't know, can you use the word on YouTube, the G word, it rhymes with grinicide. And they suggest that maybe they can get into the headquarters during the speech. So they arrive later that night, and Kirk and Spock and Isak pose as basically a press team, military journalists who are covering Daris and her coming to see the speech. Now she takes them into headquarters and she points out the screen. So the Führer's not going to give this speech in person. He'll be on a view screen, even for the people here in headquarters. He's actually going to deliver the speech from inside this booth here. And she shows them where the entrance to the booth is, which is right there, guarded, of course. Now they go down to the entrance, and Kirk and Isak, they distract the guards. And while they're doing that, Spock peeks in the room and he sees Gil in the room, but Gil seems to be almost in some sort of trance or something. He's not moving or speaking. At this point, they decide they need some help. So they go to a cloakroom to get out of sight, and then Kirk calls the Enterprise. And fortunately, the communicator does work. And they speak to Uhura, and Kirk tells her, he orders that McCoy be issued a Yahtzee uniform, and then he will beam down to them because they think Gil might need medical attention or something like that. So McCoy beams down, dressed up as a Yahtzee colonel, or maybe it was general, colonel or general. And they're explaining the situation to McCoy when Enig shows up with a couple of guards. And then they explain that the colonel has had too much to drink, and they wanted to get him out of sight before he embarrassed himself. Now, somewhat incredible as it may be, Enig buys the story and warns them that there are spies around because they've detected the transmissions from the communicator. So they say there are spies in the building who are using some sort of transmitter. Keep an eye out for them, and then they leave. And Kirk and Spock are surprised that Enig didn't seem to recognize them from when he saw them earlier in the day. But Kirk just kind of chalks it up to good luck. Now, meanwhile, Gil begins his speech, so he comes on the view screen, and then you start hearing him speak. Now, they come back into the viewing room to watch this, and as they're listening, they realize that his speech seems, well, first of all, it's pretty obvious that his lips aren't really moving. His mouth and jaw aren't really moving. Anyone could see that. But they note that it seems like his speech is disjointed, and they realize or begin to suspect that what this is a recording that's cobbled together from bits of other recordings, and so different sentences from different recordings that are just kind of blended together. And that basically he's not really even talking. This is some sort of pre-recorded thing. So they decide they need to get to Gil. So they go back down to the entrance to the booth, and they overpower the guards. And Spock nerve pinches one, and Isak again. It's amazing how many people in this episode just go down with the slightest pretense. Isak literally just like puts his arm around the guy's neck, and then the guy like groans and falls to the floor. Okay, so they get into the booth, and of course, sure enough, they find that Gil is not really speaking. Gil is heavily drugged to the point that he's almost comatose. Now, Kirk tells McCoy to give Gil an injection, a stimulant to wake him up. So they give him a shot. And but it really isn't working. It's not enough to bring him out. Kirk orders him to give another stimulant, but McCoy is reluctant to do it. He says that might kill him. So then they have Spock do a mind meld on him to try and bring him out of it. And that wakes him up enough for him to answer a few questions. And basically, what he reveals is that, he chose the Nazi form of government for the Ecosians because, as he said, it was the most efficient form of government that man had known. Uh, okay. But amazingly, he taught them Yahtzee values and Yahtzee beliefs. And then, who would have guessed? Then they started doing Yahtzee things. I mean, who would have ever guessed that would happen? So he said that eventually Malikon, who is the second in command, the deputy Fuhrer, this guy, he seized control basically. And since then, Gil has been kept imprisoned and drugged and largely just used as a figurehead. He no longer really has any power. And that's really all they can get out of him before he falls unconscious again. Then Enig shows up again with a couple of guards. And then they claim that they have caught Spock, who is a Zeon spy, trying to assassinate the Fuhrer. I mean, they totally throw Spock under the bus here. So, and Enig seems, kind of unconvinced by this, but he accepts the story anyway. And so he takes Spock away, and then Isak reveals that Enig is actually part of the resistance. He's working with them, which explains why he's been so gullible and willing to buy all their stories. So they take Spock to Melicon, and of course he takes a look at Spock, and of course announces that because he's clearly not human or not Ecosian, clearly he is inferior, and Spock is bemused to hear all of this. But then Gil starts speaking. Now he's woken up enough that he can talk, and so he starts to denounce Melicon and says that Melicon has betrayed them all, and that this war against the Zeons is not what they should be doing, and it's wrong, all that. Now Melicon is enraged by this, so he grabs a machine gun and he machine guns the booth. Then Isak shoots Melicon, and Gil is wounded, and he eventually dies. Now Enig comes to the room, and he and Darius basically say that they'll have to make their own way now, and they will try to guide the Ecosians towards a more peaceful, and less tyrannical form of government. And Kirk and Spock and McCoy decide, they've done all they can here, so they beam back up to the Enterprise, and then later they're discussing the whole thing. And Spock expresses some dismay at how he thought that, how could Gil, a man as intelligent as Gil, ever believe that this would work? And, you know, Kirk basically says that I forget how he doesn't say it that way, but basically there are some people who are always going to think that they know better, and that no matter how dangerous the system is created, that they'll be able to run it properly or whatever. I would compare it to people who insist that there's nothing wrong with communism, it just hasn't been done right, and it ends there. So overall, this is a decent episode. There's definitely some plot holes here, but they're all relatively minor, I think. So I give this one a B minus, I guess. All right, let me take a drink of water right quick here. Okay. All right. So this was written by John Meredith Lucas. Let me okay, let's go back here. There we go. Written by John Meredith Lucas and directed by Vincent McAveety. Okay, this is from an NBC press release issued January 19th, 1968. Captain Kirk and Spock are captured on a warlike planet with a Yahtzee type regime while searching for a cultural observer from whom nothing had been heard for 5 years in Patterns of Force on NBC Television's Colorcast of Friday, February 16th. Kirk and Spock are imprisoned and tortured by the regime which rules the planet Ekos and learn that their captors are bent on eliminating immigrants from the planet Zayon. Isaac, also a prisoner, helps them escape to the Zayon underground. Assisted by Darius and later by Enig, they find John Gill, the missing observer who is being used by the deputy Führer, Melicon, as a front for wholesale extermination of a peaceful people. It is discovered that Gill, a teacher from Kirk's academy days, sent to Ekos to secretly observe the planetary development, had ignored the Federation mandate of non-interference in order to become the Ekosians' leader. Now Kirk must undo the damage, which includes aborting an attack Ekos is preparing to launch on its sister planet Zayon. The theme of this episode is that power corrupts even those who think they know better. If great care is not taken, the history of man will repeat in other countries and even on other worlds. While lacking in subtlety, Patterns of Force nonetheless entertains. The teaser, portraying a missile attack on the Enterprise from a planet that should not have the technology to instigate such hostilities, is intriguing. The first few minutes of Act 1 continue to entice as Kirk and Spock watch government propaganda on a giant video screen in the middle of an outdoor square, and then watch in astonishment as stormtroopers chase down and kick a helpless Zayon pig. Then the heavy handedness begins as the camera pans up from the man being beaten to the swastika armbands on his tormentors. What follows is not all bad. The comedy certainly works as a long suffering Kirk gives Spock a boost on his freshly flogged back, or Melicon, to Spock's deadpan response, deduces that Vulcans are an inferior race and even stupid looking, or McCoy materializing a closet struggling to put on his boots, or Kirk putting on a German officer's cap and then being told by Spock that he should make a convincing Yahtzee. Director Vincent McAveety gets good results from the guest actors playing members of the resistance. As contrived as the story may be, the sincerity of their performances helps to disguise a premise that is for the most part absurd. And Lucas's story delivers a statement concerning the inherent flaws and dangers of the leader principle. However, the characterizations here are one-dimensional stereotypes with little more than cartoon treatment of a menace that could otherwise be truly villainous. Likewise, the dialogue is often forced and melodramatic, and the writer's obvious goal to examine and explain how people like the Yahtzees could seduce a nation and gain unconditional power, then become perverted by that power is never achieved. Other problematic areas include an expert historian who thinks it's a good idea to emulate Yahtzee Germany's fascist policies. Yeah, really. The closing idea that the removal of one man will cause these imitative people to immediately become a fine addition to the Federation, and of course, the unmentioned fact that everybody on two nearby planets, on two alien planets, seems to speak English. Patterns of Force is not a disaster. Its entertainment value supersedes its story holes and ham-fistedness. And as Spock says, Kirk does indeed make a convincing Yahtzee. Okay, after impressing producer Gene Kuhn with his script for The Changeling, despite heavy rewriting by DC Fontana, John Meredith Lucas returned for what would be his third writing assignment on Star Trek. So this was his third script for Star Trek. The first being The Changeling. Now he had actually submitted a second story outline for another episode called The Lost Star, but that never really got past the story stage, and it wasn't picked up. He wanted to do a story about a parallel planet that falls under the control of the biggest, baddest heavies that Hollywood can offer, the Yahtzees. Lucas later said, quote, the totalitarian society has always intrigued me. How could something like that have come about? Of course, I know the history, but how in the minds of people could this have possibly happened? I started off with the premise that I would try to explain it, that not Yahtzeeism created an efficient society for accomplishing specific ends. And this is what the guy from the Federation attempted to utilize. But then, like in the past, an entire nation got swept up in it. Kuhn was way ahead of Lucas and had already bought a Yahtzee themed story from writer Paul Schneider titled Tomorrow the Universe. The two episodes actually have very similar openings. In the teaser of both scripts, the Enterprise is attacked with a missile, and both stories have a member of the Federation interfering with an alien society and introducing a Yahtzee like system, right down to the swastikas and goose stepping. Now, even as the staff was responding so negatively to the third draft of Tomorrow the Universe, the story outlines for Pattern of Force were being distributed. Paul Schneider, he had introduced this Tomorrow the Universe script, and several people, not so much the people on the show, but more like the executives at Desilu and at NBC didn't like it. And there were a number of reasons, but mainly because as it was written, it was way too expensive. It was never gonna get made. And hello, Rogues 1138. Thanks for stopping by. Good to see you again. And so they insisted on extensive rewriting, and it had gone through a couple of drafts. And by the time the third draft was being circulated in the office, John Meredith Lucas's first initial draft of Patterns of Force started being circulated as well. So now they had two Yahtzee themed episodes. Now, eventually, of course, they would opt to go with John Meredith Lucas's script because that one was more filmable and didn't require so many effects shots and that sort of thing. Reaction to this news story, although not overwhelmingly positive, was better than the staff opinions of Tomorrow the Universe. Work on the latter was abruptly stopped and the script was shelved. Kuhn then ordered a revised draft of the story outline for Patterns of Force. Lucas completed this on July 19th and mailed it off to Star Trek production offices. And overall, this one, like I said, was received much better. Stan Robertson at NBC found the storyline to be well plotted. It had been a long, hard road, but Gene Kuhn would get his Yahtzees in Space episode. Except for one small problem, the journey had taken so long that Star Trek had no further need for scripts, at least not at the until the mid-season pickup came in. By the time the script for the episode was written, Gene Kuhn had left, and the writer of Patterns of Force, John Meredith Lucas, was also now the producer. And who was going to tell the new producer that his script wasn't good enough? Good point. Lucas said, quote, thankfully, there were very little problems in terms of covering such material. Gene tended to do no censorship on that basis. He would come in and, if anything, would encourage wilder statements. He was a very adventurous guy, so there was no opposition in terms of, my God, what are you doing? What are you writing about? Roddenberry, in fact, was busy with his latest rewrite of The Omega Glory and preparing Assignment Earth. Patterns of Force was the least of his concerns. Lucas enjoyed this freedom and wrote the script as he saw best, and he had fun with the names. Enig, of course, is Gene spelled backwards, and the name Zayon is derived from Zion. Abraham became Abram, and Isaac became Isaac. But there were some quibbles here and there. Stan Robertson wrote to Lucas, Kirk and Spock's escape from the prison cell seems a little too contrived. Can we not possibly utilize something which calls upon Spock to delay some of his Vulcan logic or physical prowess, or some device which Kirk has hidden on himself, which the society they find themselves captive by has no understanding of? This device eventually became the transponders, a small unit implanted under a crewman's skin as a security measure for planet survey teams. And, I mean, it's a decent idea, but you wonder why they haven't used these transponders before. I mean, how many episodes have there been where they beam down, and then without their communicators, the ship can't find them. It would be nice to have these transponders hidden on them all the time, wouldn't it? The 1960s version of GPS tracking proved useful for this episode when the series leads found themselves captured by the Yazis. Lucas, whose early draft for The Changeling and future scripts such as Elan of Troyes and That Which Survives were big on expository sequences where everyone stands around and talks. Fontana had done the trimming on his script for The Changeling as others would for the later episodes. But with this outing, the only editing would be done by Lucas himself. To his credit, he acted on DC's Fontana's suggestions and he pruned the script significantly. So she had taken a look at the script, and while it was good, she felt there was way too much standing around and talking and not enough doing and action and that sort of thing. Too much telling and not enough showing. And as she says, she said, quote, after Gene Kuhn decided to leave, John was not a bad choice to replace him. He did know the show. He was an experienced writer-producer. He and I had a good relationship in regard to scripts and stories. He didn't have the sense of humor Gene had, but he had a sound understanding of how a series worked and knew how to exercise it. On Patterns of Force, John was willing to take notes and implement them. He was a thorough professional. Let's see. Okay. So, director Vincent McAvity was back for the first time in the second season. Now, during season one, he had directed Miri, Balance of Terror, and Dagger of the Mind. Now that Joseph Pevney had left the show, McAvity was slated to come in and begin alternating episodes with Mark Daniels, Ralph Sineski, and even John Meredith Lucas. So, Scrip Homeyer played Melicon. Let's see if I can. Actually, I think he may not be until the. Let me back here. Yeah, it'll be quicker to get to him this way. There he is. He was 37. He began his career at the age of 14 playing a character named Skippy Homeyer in a movie, a 1944 film called Tomorrow the World. Now, as coincidence would have it, in this role, his first acting role, he played a Hitler Youth of all things. Homeyer also had a successful career as a TV guest star. He visited hundreds of sets, appearing frequently on The Virginian, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Combat, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. He was given his own series in 1960 called Dan Raven as a cop whose beat was the Hollywood division, a show that had a very similar premise to Gene Roddenberry's proposed series Nightstick, which never got made. Or did it? I don't think that got made. Homeyer also showed up on The Outer Limits with James Doohan in the episode Expanding Human. Homeyer returned to Star Trek as the guest star in one of its most notorious episodes, The Way of Eden. And let's see now, Richard Evans was Isaac. And let me see here. There he is. His career in front of the cameras kicked off in 1958. He made multiple appearances on Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, and Bonanza. He had a guest spot on Jeffrey Hunter's short-lived series Temple Houston, and also appeared on Roddenberry's series The Lieutenant. Prior to working here, Evans had a recurring role in the primetime soap opera Peyton Place. Valora Noland as Darius. Let's see. There she is. Let's see if I can find a better image. Yeah, that's good enough. She began acting for the camera in 1961. Prior to Star Trek, she had the female lead in A Hot Summer Game and Passionate Strangers, and was featured prominently in exploitation fares such as Sex and the College Girl. She had most recently worked with John Wayne in the film The War Wagon. William Wintersole played Abram. Let's see. That's a good enough picture of him. He was 36. Although I think he looks older. He looks more like 46, but what do I know? Before Patterns of Force, Winter Soul appeared in The Outer Limits, The Wild Wild West, and The Invaders. Later, the soaps would keep him gainfully employed. Joe DaGosta, who before becoming Star Trek's first casting director, had been an actor for the stage, and they had worked together. Winter Soul said, I had done a play which was a very successful production in LA, and DaGosta knew me from that. And he was very good to me, booking me for that Star Trek and also for 5 different episodes of Mission Impossible. Patrick Horgan played Chairman Enig. Let's see, get a good one of him. There's a good one. His TV career with some film work began in 1956. Born in Nottingham, England, Horgan was a big Sherlock Holmes enthusiast. He appeared in plays about Holmes and performed in numerous Sherlock Holmes audio novels. He was also the author of a book called The Detection of Sherlock Holmes. In television, he primarily kept active in soap operas, including recurring roles on The Guiding Light, One Life to Live, The Doctors, and Ryan's Hope. Horgan said, quote, I watch Star Trek religiously every week. I've always been a science fiction fan, so was forever concerned as to whether those shows were getting it right or not. And of course, they can't possibly get it right because how do you know what right is even going to be? But Star Trek had good actors and a good team, and I just loved it. The script Horgan was sent was atypical of Star Trek. He said, quote, I was fascinated with it. I thought it was great stuff. And when I read that script, I wondered where were those names coming from? My name was Enig, and it was clear that was Gene spelled backwards. Okay, David Bryan played John Gill. And find a better look at him, who doesn't have much of a role here. He basically just spends most of the episode like this, sort of playing like he's asleep. This is probably the easiest paycheck this guy ever cashed. It's basically, what's your role? Okay, you're going to sit in a chair and be asleep. Okay, I could do that. David Bryan, who was 53, played John Gill. Roddenberry knew Bryan, having written several scripts for the actors for a mid-1950 series called Mr. District Attorney, which Gill had appeared on. Bryan was somewhat of a star back then, having begun his career on a high note, being nominated for a Golden Globe Award in 1949 as Best Supporting Actor for his role in a film called Intruder in the Dust. Let's see, then Gilbert Green, I believe that was the SS guy that has them whipped, I believe. So back here. There, this guy. This was his third appearance on Star Trek. He was previously seen in Miri and less notably as an inmate in, or I'm sorry, no, that's the wrong one. Gilbert Green. Okay, yeah, so he was 53 and was often cast as Germans and Yahtzee types on TV for shows such as Hogan's Heroes and Get Smart. He had also appeared on The Lieutenant. Oh, and also an interesting note. So, okay, so the announcer who's doing the news broadcast at the beginning, this is Bert LaRue, and Bert LaRue provided the voice of the Guardian of Forever back in City on the Edge of Forever. Okay, now John Meredith Lucas, who liked being on set and was sticking close to director McAvity. He recalled, quote, "We were using some of the office buildings on the Paramount lot as backgrounds. So between setups, I ran over to say hello to Hal Wallace, a friend of mine with whom I had started as a writer. And as I was rushing back to set, I was intercepted by a man who introduced himself, wondering if we might be relatives. He said his name was Lucas. He was very friendly and obviously wanted to talk, but I had spent more time than I had planned with Hal and was in a hurry. My assistant told me crew was ready for the next shot, and I was skirting the outer edge of my schedule. So I brushed this visitor off and went back to set. And we shot the scene. Now, when I looked up again after the shot was done, he was gone. And it turns out that guy that had come up to him and said hello was George Lucas, apparently. Of course, he wouldn't know that until years later. Okay, so day 2 of shooting, William Wintersole worked this day as Abram, the senior member of the underground movement, who seems to be shot dead but is only testing Kirk and Spock. He recalled, quote, "It was a brief sequence shot maybe twice in and out, and we did it that way. With those schedules, there was just no other way to do it. You hit your mark, you say your lines, but that isn't the thing they were paying you for. They were paying you to never lose your character and always perform to the top of your ability to bring that character to life in the circumstances that have been explained. Doing television is, in many ways, like performing on the stage. If you make a mistake in a stage production, you can't stop and do it again. You know your character and you do what your character would do to move forward despite a prop breaking or another actor forgetting a line. You think in that moment, what would my character do? And you continue, and that allows a sequence of scenes such as these to be shot quickly." Okay, now on day 3 of filming, a young fan was brought onto the set. Her name was Kim Larson, and she was there for, just sort of a press junket with a periodical called Fave magazine. And I guess this was probably like a teen oriented thing. And they were doing an expose on her visit to Hollywood and the Star Trek set. Larson told Fave feature writer Cam Litton, quote, "When we got to the Star Trek studios on Gower Street, I was really surprised. I thought the Monkeys set had been hard to get onto and the Columbia Ranch too, but this was ridiculous. They checked us out like we were spies or something, even though they already knew we were coming." As we walked onto the stage 11 door, or in the stage 11 door, this buzzer went off and some man yelled, "Quiet," from over in the corner. We tiptoed up to where they were filming and saw Leonard Nimoy in jail strapped up to his waist with green blood all over him. And that was my first sight of the Star Trek stars, and you can believe I won't forget that for a long time. They finished with that particular scene and started to film another when someone yelled makeup. And then this man runs over and he brushed some more green stuff all over Mr. Spock's back to make it look like he'd been whipped. Well, I'd been so involved with seeing Leonard Nimoy covered in green blood in that jail, I hadn't noticed the other things around. And then I noticed there were some other Yahtzee soldiers around, and then I realized everyone was dressed up like Yahtzees. You see, the story in this episode was that the Enterprise crash lands on a foreign planet that has made itself like Germany. So I look around, and they all have Yahtzee uniforms and machine guns. Let's see now, Patrick Horgan on his second day of filming. Let's see. Actually, let me go here. And I think this actor, of all the actors in the episode, I think he has the best look. I mean, he looks, I don't know, it looks right on him. He looks like a Yahtzee to me. Patrick Horgan on his second day of filming said, quote, "I do remember one rather charming incident. I was coming in one morning and Bill Shatner was struggling to squeeze into his costume. And he said to me, 'Have you noticed that these uniforms seem to keep shrinking?' And I said, 'Oh, well, no, I don't seem to be having any trouble with mine.' And he had a good sense of humor about it. He was a very affable fellow and a joy to work with." Horgan recalled, "As a director, Vincent McAveety was very good. You never got into a situation where they were going to wiggle around for another take and another take and another take. He knew exactly what he wanted." Or at least McAveety knew exactly how little a 6-day production schedule would allow for retakes. He was discovering, as Ralph Sineski had before him, that the new management at Paramount was not going to allow for overtime or added days. Even get to directors like Sineski and McAveety, whose productions were always a notch above the average for Star Trek, were now under far more scrutiny and the threat of termination. The director of this episode agreed that there was very little subtlety in Patterns of Force. Vincent McAveety said, quote, I didn't like it. To me, it was very manufactured. There was nothing real about it. If you don't have something to hang on to, something to where as a human being you could say, that could have been me. If you don't have that value in a show, it's hardly worth the effort. It doesn't matter if it's science fiction or a Western. You have to believe the character and then you're touched by it. But I was a little bit embarrassed by that one, not specifically of what I did or didn't do, but this show I just felt didn't have it. There was nothing there to grab onto. I liked John Meredith Lucas, but I never felt John was a particularly good writer. He may have been a good producer, although outside of a few outstanding producers, Gene Roddenberry being one of them, I was never really clear on just exactly what a producer does. I know what he pretends to do. I mean, John Mantley of Gunsmoke was a great producer, and Roddenberry, and I was really blessed to work with those guys. Gene Roddenberry always had a purpose in whatever he was doing. John Mantley was the same kind of producer. Now, to me, that's what a producer should be. That's his primary function, to make sure there's something to say, then helping with the cast, the director, and all of that. But so many people who put on the cloak of a producer and go through all the motions with all the smoke screens and all the dialogue they have, and they don't come up with anything. One person who did find the episode had something to say was Paul Schneider. Feeling that he had been plagiarized, Schneider filed an arbitration suit with the Writers Guild of America. On February 28th, 1968, Roddenberry wrote to Gary Ellingsworth at the Writers Guild, quote, I double-checked with both John Lucas and Gene Kuhn, and they assure me that John never read Paul Schneider's story or script. And in fact, John Lucas was only lately aware that Schneider had written a Yahtzee script. Gene Kuhn informed me that having paid Paul Schneider full price for the script, he presumed he owned the Yahtzee idea, but felt that since he was not using Schneider's story, he had no obligation to clear Lucas's assignment. On May 28th of 1968, Paul Schneider tried to bury the hatchet. His brief letter to Gene Roddenberry read, quote, Dear Gene, a note I've been meaning to write because I believe it's due. I've been told about the Guild arbitration judgment that the Patterns of Force script for Star Trek was strictly by John Meredith Lucas. Obviously, I was wrong. I misread the situation, and I owe apologies to you and Mr. Lucas, which I now tender. My sincere apologies. Schneider, who did receive sole credit for the scripts of Balance of Terror and Squire of Gothos, did not write again for the original Star Trek series. He would, however, return later in 1973 to write the Territon incident for the Star Trek cartoon. Both of the makers of Star Trek and NBC agreed that this episode missed the mark and it was not given a repeat airing in the summer. Now, here's an interesting note. Because of its subject matter, Patterns of Force was withheld from broadcast in Germany for over 30 years. Interesting. Now, they finally started airing it in Germany in 1999, but initially they would only show it at late at night on pay TV. Vincent McAveety said, quote, that was my least favorite show that they gave me to do. It was just pretentious and it was forced. I didn't care anything for it. James Doohan, who had fought against the Axis armies in World War II, said, quote, during this episode, all I could think about was how gullible the German people were. They were suckered into Hitler, and some of them loved it. There will always be those who appeal to the worst instincts of humanity. On the opposite side of the coin, Star Trek, according to William Wintersole, the leader of the underground movement in this episode, he claimed Star Trek appealed to the best in humanity. He said, quote, the fans saw in it and felt in it what was happening in the world. And it being put in science fiction form, put somewhere in the future, so it wasn't like watching a newscast, gave them the room to think about what it was that was being said. TV, with its entertainment shows, wouldn't do political statements like that at the time, but this unique concept made it possible to make those statements, and that took root in the fans. All right. Okay, so that'll do it for Patterns of Force. All right, so next week I'll be taking a look at the episode The Ultimate Computer. And after that, we'll be getting close to the end of the season. And so it goes after The Ultimate Computer, we've got What else is there here? Oh, yeah, the Omega Glory. And then after that, we've got Assignment Earth. And then after that, I'll probably do a Trek talk where I just kind of review the second season and talk about the struggle to get the show renewed. And Rogues1138 asks, have you done Assignment Earth yet? No, I have not. Uh, that'll be what, in 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, I'll do that one, I think. Let me see here. So, yeah, so that'll be in 2 weeks. And then after that, like I say, I'll probably do a Trek talk where I talk about the struggle to get the show renewed after it's, was canceled after the second season. And then probably after that, I'll do just kind of a review of the season in general, and I'll do another one of those streams where I do the rankings. I do tier rankings for the episodes. And then after that, we'll have to see, because by then I believe I'm going to be back into my postgraduate studies, and I'm not sure if I'm going to have time. I may have to put things off for a while. I'll just have to see what my schedule looks like going forward from there. So about another month of stuff. And let's see what else. Oh, I guess I should say Happy New Year to everyone, since we're going to have New Year's Eve tomorrow. And I hope you'll all have a good New Year. We'll probably do another live stream Sunday night. And some here in the next week or so, I want to try and get another video done, which will be top 5 best Marvel villains for Green Lantern. And I guess that is going to be it. Oh, and is that, you say Assignment Earth is a fave episode? Okay. Yeah, Happy New Year's to you, Rogues, and you as well, Gwagnar. Thank you both for being here. Thanks to, oh, and please do like the stream. Please do like the stream and sub to the channel if you haven't already. Check out some of my other videos while you're here. Thank you to those who watched the stream during the broadcast and those who will catch it on a rewatch. And I guess I'll see you all next week. Have a good night.